Islam, and greetings. I am Princeanaelbey, Divine Prince of the Divine Theocracy of the Moorish Science Temple of America through Temple Alhambra. Please like, share, and subscribe, and you will not regret it, I assure you. Today, I'm going to share with you some things that I know you were never told. And these things include the Great Depression, Al Capone, and the Prophet Noble Drew Ali. These are things that you were never told, never taught, but I'm going to give them to you today. Now, for those who are familiar with the Moorish Science Temple of America, what you know is this government was formed in August of 1928. What you did not know was the relationship that was formed between Al Capone, the young man who ruled Chicago, and the Prophet Noble Drew Ali. Now, before I begin, let me give you a little background on this. As I told you, my masters, the men whose feet I sat at as a little boy, they were there with the Prophet. They were privy to things that even those Moors running around here today, they talk about things, but they have absolutely no knowledge of these things. My masters were there. And again, they were in the Prophet's Young Men's International Business League. That is where they learned Moorish science. Now, the way I was taught, and I was taught much Moorish science, and I was given information from my masters about those days that I knew nothing about, which would be the Roaring '20s. They were there. They saw it all, and they were privy to things that Moors walking around today have no idea about. One of these things is the meeting which took place at the Lexington Hotel on 21st and Michigan in 1927 between Al Capone and the Prophet Noble Drew Ali. Now, at the time, there were guys who have recently departed, and by recently I mean within the past 50 years recently. They were there with Al Capone. And if they were here and you were to ask them, they would confirm what I'm about to tell you. Now, there were 3 men who actually controlled what I call the Progressive Businessmen's Association here in Chicago. I don't use the term mob. Chicago has no mafia, never did, because Al Capone was never a mafiosi. Never. And that is why the Progressive Businessmen's Organization that he established here in Chicago is simply known as the outfit. At the time, 3 former heads of the Chicago outfit, they were with Al Capone. And you know, it can't be any secret. Everybody knows these guys. You had Joey Aiuppa. You had Sam Momo Giancana. And you had Paul the Waiter Rica. These guys ran the outfit here in Chicago. They were also around during the time of Al Capone. I think Paul Rica was Al's chauffeur. He was his driver, if I'm not mistaken. Any rate, going further, in 1928, check that. In 1927, the year before the Prophet took that trip to Havana, Cuba, to the Pan American Conference, the Prophet was a very enlightened man, and his 3rd degree was on par. His 3rd degree was on par. In October of 1927, the Prophet Noble Drew Ali went down to the Lexington Hotel. He had established a meeting with Mr. Al Capone. What the Prophet told Mr. Capone was what his plans were and what could possibly become of the economics of America. He and Al Capone had this discussion. And Al, not being stupid, Al really was a good guy. I mean, where the people were concerned. Because Al Capone was smart enough to know if you keep your customer base happy, you will have a customer for life. And Al Capone, what you don't hear about him is that he really was people-oriented. He really was. He was a gangster with other gangsters. But he was just a guy with other people. When he and the Prophet met, and the Prophet informed him of his impending trip to Havana, Cuba that next year, Al Capone made provisions. He made provisions for the inevitable. And in 1928, when the Prophet went to Havana, Cuba, to the Pan American Conference, that is when he was given a mandate for this land. Now, former Secretary Hughes also went to this conference, and he had no business there because the United States is not an American state. And this was a Pan-American conference. It did not invite the United States. The United States is not America. And it was a Pan-American conference. Secretary Hughes went to spy on not only the Prophet, but what those other Muslim nations were doing so that he could report back to the State Department in Washington, D.C. Well, during that conference, at the conference on private international law and what constitutes a government, Hughes tried real hard to hang around that committee. But he was tapped to be the chair of another committee. He declined. But I think they persuaded him to go anyway. And so the members of the American states, they could have their committee meeting. That is where and when the Prophet Noble Drew Ali was given the mandate for North America. Now, this was in 1928. In 1929, I'm going to give you the true breakdown of why the Depression occurred. The prophet was given the mandate in 1928. And from the time the prophet got home, Secretary Hughes had already informed the State Department that their lie about the United States being America and all that happy horse shit, well, the United States is a debtor nation. In George Washington's word, he kept using the word nation, remember? It's a debtor nation. And it owed money to everybody. And when the prophet came home in 1928, by November of 1929, every country that ever loaned the United States a dime, once they learned that there was a sovereign here and it didn't have shit to do with the United States, they all called in their markers. They all called in those loans. The United States of America could not handle that kind of pressure from its lenders. And at that point, the United States of America went bust. Now, at the time this happened, Chicago was among the first cities to establish missions for the people affected by the chicanery of the United States. When they learned that the Prophet Noble Drew Ali owned all of this land, well, they had to do something about this. So they did wind up killing him. That's another lesson for another day, though. Al Capone, and I don't know why that mission isn't still down there on State Street today. Al Capone, he was perspicacious enough to allocate money to open up these soup kitchens and these missions for the hungry and the homeless, because landlords still wanted their rent. They knew there was no damn money here and nobody had any, but they were still kicking people out in the streets. And another thing that your Twistorians don't tell you is there were a lot of vacant houses and apartments here. A lot of them. I mean, it really didn't matter whether you kicked people out of them or not. You still weren't having any income from them. So what did you gain by putting families in the streets? At any rate, Al Capone established soup kitchens and missions for these people. Al Capone, even some of his buddies in other states, they sent truckloads of apples here. And the people who were trying to survive during the Depression, they sold apples. Nobody ever asked them where those apples came from. Those apples came from Al Capone. They came from Al Capone. Now, the reason that the government came after, the reason the United States government came after Al Capone was because he was actually helping people. They didn't want that. They actually wanted people to starve to death. Because remember, the United States is at war with you, always has been. Now, just to demonstrate to you how full of shit the United States is, they picked Al up and put Al in prison in 1931 for tax evasion. Damnedest thing is, the IRS was not around in 1931. The IRS did not get created until 1932. That's when the IRS was formed, in 1932. So how are you going to arrest Al Capone in 1931 for tax evasion and you had no bean counters then? See, it's all bullshit. But when the prophet came back with the mandate, he demonstrated it to Al Capone. My masters gave me these degrees. They were there. They were there. Master Princeanaelbey went with the prophet. Gibbons stayed in the car downstairs at the Lexington Hotel on Michigan Avenue. In 1927 is when Al Capone made the Lexington his home. That's his permanent address. That was his permanent address, the Lexington Hotel. And the prophet, he went on to do what he was doing with the MSTofA. And of course, we all know what happened to his organization. But I just wanted to give you that bit of real story concerning the relationship between the prophet and Mr. Al Capone. The prophet, he gathered political steam, meaning he had a political base, which was recognized here. He had a political base here. He had his Moors in the temple. And we need to get back to that, which is why I continue to urge you all, you vote Republican. You get back to the frame of mind of your ancestors. Get out of that goddamn Democratic bullshit. Get back to the frame of mind of your ancestors. That's what you need to do. At any rate, when the prophet, Noble Drew Ali, once he got the mandate and it was known and he developed a political base that was observed, the Moorish Science Temple of America, they actually put somebody in the legislature. His name was Oscar de Priest. And he went to the legislature, what most people still refer to as a Congress, even though there is no Congress and hasn't been one since the 1700s. At any rate, it was the Moorish Science Temple of America which put Oscar de Priest in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Now, the issue that I have with Mr. de Priest and all of the other politicians that the prophet helped, where was Oscar de Priest when the sheiks of the Moorish Science Temple of America had a shootout with the Chicago Police Department about the prophet? They wanted to come get him. His sheiks were not going to allow that. And they actually had a shootout. The sheiks of the MSTofA and the Chicago Police Department, they had a shootout over the prophet. Because the powers that be, mainly the United States of America, well, they had to save face. So let's get rid of the little brown man. We can reestablish this lie that we own everything from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and all will be right in our conquering little world. These are just some of the facts that I will be bringing you, my masters were very good men. They're very good. And I would like to think they taught me well while I sat at their feet. I sat at their feet from the time I was 8 years old all the way until my early 20s. And they were my teachers. They were hard, but I was used to hard. I lived at home with my father. And I thought beating me became that man's newfound religion. So I was used to the corporal punishment that my masters meted out to me. But again, brothers and sisters, just a bit of real story. Where the prophet is concerned, the city of Chicago, and Mr. Alphonse Capone. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I shall see you again. I bid you peace.